Hello, it's Monday, May 18th, and it's National No Dirty Dishes Day. And today's the day we're going to finish the book. And I found out that the next book is actually the prequel to The City of Ember. So that should be good. It's also going to be tricky because I have it digitally, so I'm not sure I'm going to set it up, but I'll figure it out. Okay, so they decided to let them stay. They're going to work together. And here we go. Yeah, there's much to be worked out, Mary said. It won't be easy, but we'll talk about it together. Whatever they lay ahead, they thought would probably be better. They were willing to try for it. After that, they turned to the practical details. Actually, said Alma Hogan, the storehouse manager, there's a fair amount of food in the storehouse. It's just that we never like to use it all up. This year, we'll expect to use it all and hope we can replenish it next year. I'm afraid a great deal of it is pickles, though. I like pickles. By the end of winter, we may still all be eating more pickles than anything else. Dune's father mentioned politely that the hotel residents would have to have decent houses sooner or later. Mary said they would start building some of them now out behind the meadow. The best of Sparks builders would be in charge, and they would teach the Emberites construction. The houses will be small, Mary said, and we'll be able to build only a few before the rains come. Most of you will have to spend the winter in the hotel. Clary stood up to announce that her garden was producing well. In addition to cucumbers, melons, and peppers, she had grown nearly 100 butternut squashes, which would keep well through the winter. That would help a little. The village looked at her curiously. Butternut squashes? They had never heard of them. Ha ha, the tables are turned. I grew them from seeds I brought from Ember, Clary said. I brought all the seeds I had, all kinds. Next year I'll be able to grow more. Mrs. Murdo said she had learned a great deal in her time with the doctor. She would like to be an assistant doctor. It's clear that this community needs more than one, she said. I know something about plants, said Maddie, speaking up for the first time. I wish to be assistant hotel gardener with Clary. Whoa, hi, Kara. It scared me. Kara came in with a wet nose with Clary Lane. Edward Pocket said he demanded to be made official librarian. Mary looked surprised. We don't have a library, she said. Exactly right, said Edward. You have a disorderly heap of books. I have made great progress with them. However, I invite you to come by and see. Hi, Dickie. Ben Barlow kept muttering dire warnings about crop failures and vitamin deficiencies and epidemics, but Mary said they would cope with these problems when and if they actually occurred. Little by little, people began to feel interested in how this new arrangement was going to work. There were endless questions. What if there were arguments? How would they be settled? Would the Emberites go back to eating with their lunchtime families? Would they get enough for dinner and breakfast? What would happen when they needed things other than food, like shoes or soap or hats? Hi, Kara. You want to say hi to the kids? There's my pretty girl. Hi, Kara. Hi. Hi, pretty girl. And there's I'm not making dinner yet, guys. I think it's time for dinner. It's too soon. So listen to the story or find something else to do. Okay. The trouble is, said Mrs. Polster, we don't have anything. We can't trade for the goods at the market because we don't have anything you'd want. But Dune saw the solution to this right away. We do, he said. Mrs. Polster raised her eyebrows at him. She wasn't. She said, I got both dogs sitting there staring at me. She wasn't used to being contradicted. We have one thing that you need, Dune said. Matches. We still have a lot left. We could use them to trade with, at least for a while. 2 matches for a pair of shoes, say? People laughed and clapped. It was perfect. Ben said in his opinion a pair of shoes was worth at least 5 matches, but no one paid much attention. All of this has to be worked out, Mary said. It's going to involve disagreement and it's going to involve hardship. But we have endured hardship before. We can do it again. Yay! Wilmer sighed. It's just that we hoped we wouldn't have to, he said. Mary shot him a stern look. We can do it again, she repeated, and we will. Chapter 29, those 3 amazing visits. Kira, sit down. Lena gave up on trying to persuade Mrs. Murdo to move to the hotel. Since they'd all have their own houses sooner or later, they might as well stay at the doctor's house until then. Besides, Mrs. Murdo was so intent on learning to be assistant director that it seemed unkind to take her away. There's a lot of wanting to be kind in the story. Lena and Maddie took on the job of harvesting and preserving the produce in the doctor's vegetable garden. Every morning they picked baskets of tomatoes and beans and peppers and corn and squash. There's Dickie. Every afternoon, you guys can look at Dickie. He hasn't made a guest appearance lately. There he is. Hi, Dickie. Good boy. Yeah, good boy. Every morning they picked baskets. He's going to make himself a little nest. Tomatoes and beans and peppers and corn and squash. Every afternoon they sliced tomatoes and laid them in the sun to dry. They took dried beans out of their pods and put them in jars. They cooked peppers and packed them in olive oil. They tied bunches of herbs with string and hung them up to dry. Poppy puttered around their feet, helping by sprinkling dry leaves here and there or banging spoons on pots. Even Torrin, whose feet were healing, often chose to hang around with Lena and Maddie. He said he knew how to make a garlic braid, so they gave him a basket of garlic and he made one. One afternoon, as she and Maddie were cutting green beans for dinner, Lena heard wheels crunching on the road outside. The next moment, she heard the waffling of an ox, and then Torrin sprang up and limped as fast as he could to the front of the house. Uh-oh, thought Lena. Is it who I think it is? It was. Who else, guys? Right, Caspar. There was Caspar's battered truck, and there was Caspar just climbing out of it. He looked grubby. His mustache drooped. Torrin ran toward him, crying, "Caspar, Caspar, Caspar!" And Caspar smiled in a tired way. "Hey, brother," he said. He thumped Torrin's back a couple of times. Then he started toward the house. Lena and Maddie went out to meet him. When he saw them, he stopped and glared. "Deserters," he said, but he didn't seem to have the energy to berate them further. He trudged into the house and plunked down on the couch. Torrin plunked down beside him. "I've been waiting and waiting for you," Torrin said. "Why didn't you come back with them?" He flicked his hand toward Lena and Maddie. "I had important work to do," said Caspar, which they didn't want to help with. "And what happened with your work?" asked Maddie, standing by the door. "Did you find what you wanted to find?" Caspar didn't even look at her. He closed his eyes and slumped against the back of the couch. "My numbers," he said, "need readjusting. They were completely right except for one thing." What thing was that?" asked Maddie. "Wrong city," said Caspar, still without opening his eyes. "I have reworked the numbers. Tomorrow I head north." Maddie and Lena exchanged a look. Caspar turned his head toward Maddie and squinted at her. "I don't suppose you want to come," he said. "No, thank you," said Maddie. "I plan to stay here, where something with real potential is beginning." Torrin tugged at Caspar's arm. "Did you bring me something this time?" he asked. Caspar opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling for a while. "Well, yes," he said, "I did." "What?" shrieked Torrin. "What is it? Can I have it now?" "It's out in the truck," said Caspar. "I found a whole crate of them. Very unusual. You can have one." I wonder what it is. Any ideas, anybody? "One what? Let's go get it." Torrin darted to the door. Caspar heaved himself up, and they went outside. Lena watched as Caspar rooted around in one of his crates. He came up with something she recognized with a start. She hadn't seen one for a long time. It was like seeing something that belonged to an old friend, now dead. "What is it?" said Torrin. "A light bulb," said Caspar. "I found a case of 48 of them, all unused." "But what does it do?" Torrin asked, peering into the light bulb as if he expected to see something alive in there. He tapped the glass with his fingernail. "It gives light," said Caspar, "if you have electricity." "But we don't have electricity." "That's right," Caspar said wearily, "so you hold on to it in case someday we do." Torrin went to the window seat and sat there, turning the bulb around and around in his hands. Lena watched him, thinking about Ember. People have figured it out once, she thought. They could figure it out again. A few days after Caspar left, There was another visitor into the doctor's house. Lena, who could it be? We got 2 more coming up. Tick, maybe? I don't know. Lena went out in the courtyard at this time, cracking walnuts with a rock. She saw someone approaching the gate, a bent figure walking slowly and somewhat crookedly. She stood up. The person seemed to be having trouble with the gate latch. So she went to help, and that was when she realized it was Ben Barlow. His injured arm was bandaged and strapped to his side, and the jacket he wore was draped over it with a sleeve hanging empty. That was why he looked lopsided. "Good afternoon," said Ben. "I wonder if Torrin is here." "He is," said Lena. "I'll get him." She found Torrin in the back of the house, sitting under a tree. In back of the house, not in the back of the house, sitting on a tree. That wouldn't be possible, would it? In back of the house, sitting under a tree, eating a hunk of bread. "Your uncle has come to see you," she said. Torrin stared at her. "My uncle?" He sounded both excited and scared. He jumped up, shoving the bread into his pocket. When Ben saw Torrin coming toward him, he frowned. Then, as if catching himself, he changed his expression to a smile. "Hello, nephew," he said. "How are you getting along?" Torrin looked wary. "Fine," he said. "Good," said Ben. He stroked his beard. Lena wondered if that was all he had to say. Torrin filled the silence. "Is your arm still attached to you?" he said. "Yes," said Ben, "but just barely." He started to frown into the air again and then thought better of it. He sat down on the bench. "Well," he said, "I thought I'd just come and see you. Haven't seen you for a while." "Years," said Torrin. "Well, yes, busy life, being a town leader. Many decisions to make, matters of right and wrong to grapple with." "Oh," said Torrin. Lena could tell he was thinking the same thing she was. Why has he come? "Sometimes one makes the right decision," said Ben, "and sometimes not." "I guess so," said Torrin. Ben readjusted his bandaged arm. Lena saw that his beard was not as neatly trimmed as usual. Probably he had a hard time doing it with his left hand. She was pretty sure Ben didn't have a wife. She'd never heard of mention of one. "Well," said Ben, "you were fortunate, weren't you, getting pulled out of that tree?" "Yes," said Torrin. "I am forced to acknowledge," said Ben, "that it was my fault, that fire." "I guess so," said Torrin. "An accident," said Ben, "but one that did not have to happen." "Uh-huh," said Torrin. Ben got to his feet with painful slowness. "So," he said, "enjoyable talking with you. No doubt we should get to know each other. You must come by for a visit sometime. Though, of course, I'm rarely home." "You're very busy," said Torrin. "That's right," said Ben. He made his way toward the gate with his limping step. As he went out, he waved over his shoulder with his good hand, but he didn't turn around. Slowly, he started back toward the village. "That was an apology," Lena said to Torrin when Ben was gone. "He's sorry for doing what he did. I guess he's sorry for not having been a good uncle, too. For not taking you to live with him." "Live with him," said Torrin. He made a horrible face. "Well, I thought you weren't happy living with Dr. Hester," Lena said. "You never seem very happy." "I am too happy," said Ben crossly. He sat down on the bench that Ben had just left and pulled a hunk of bread from his pocket. A few little birds were hopping nearby. Absently, Torrin tossed them some crumbs. He seemed to be thinking. "I like it here," he said to Lena, and he looked up at her with his eyes all round, as if he had only just discovered this himself. The next day, Doone came to the door of the doctor's house carrying a sack. Kenny was with him, standing slightly behind Doone and peering curiously past him into the room. "I have to show you this," Doone said to Lena. "I made it with the present you brought me." "He's kind of a genius," Kenny said. "He already showed me." Doone set the sack on the window seat. It was only just after dinner time, but the days were shorter now and the sun was nearly down. Dr. Hester had already lit 2 candles. She and Mrs. Murdo and Mattie, were sitting at the table shelling lima beans. Poppy was sitting with them, tearing the bean pods into little pieces. All 4 came to see what Doone had brought. Torrin came too. He was actually more interested in showing Doone what he had than in seeing what was in the sack. I got a present from Caspar, he said. Great, said Dune, but he wasn't really listening. Lena could see how excited he was about whatever he had in the sack. His eyes shone in the candlelight. What do you think he's got? He used to alert bugs, remember? And his hands fidgeted impatiently with the string around the sack's neck. Oh, it's got to be an animal? When he got it untied, he reached into the sack and brought out a small device made of wood and metal. Some sort of machine, Lena thought. It had a coil of wire, and inside the coil she saw the magnet she'd given Dune. There was a handle that looked as if it would make something turn. Lena, not being much interested in machines, was a little disappointed. It was clear that Torrin was disappointed too. Want to see my present from Caspar? He said. In a minute, said Dune. Let me show you this first. He's going to be able to make electricity. What does it do? Lena asked. Is it some kind of a can opener? Asked Mrs. Murdo. Or maybe it's a sort of mixer, said the doctor. Or a drill, said Maddie. Nope, said Dune happily. And Kenny, his face shining with shared secret, whispered, Nope, too. You won't believe it, Dune went on, but it makes electricity. I found the directions for it in a book called Science Projects, but I couldn't try it out before because I didn't have a magnet. I didn't even know what a magnet was. But then he brought me one, Lena, and just the other day I remembered about this project. He took the machine over to the table and set it down. What you do is you turn this crank, and that turns the magnet, and that generates the electricity and runs it down these wires. It's supposed to be enough to light a light bulb. The trouble is, I can't test it because I couldn't find any light bulbs that weren't broken. Aha! Torrin started jumping up and down. He pounded on Dune's arm. My present from Caspar! My present from Caspar, he yelled. He bolted into the machine room. What's the matter with, said Dune, but Lena broke in. Dune, she said. His present from Caspar was a light bulb, unused. Torrin came out of the medicine room carrying the light bulb, encased in both hands, walking now, fast but with stiff legs, being extremely careful. You won't break it, will you? He said to Dune. Your experiment won't blow it up, will it? Dune gazed at the light bulb as if it was the most wonderful thing he'd ever seen. Gingerly, he reached for it. I'll be very, very careful, he said. You can help me, Torrin. Hold the light bulb right here. He showed Torrin where to put the bulb, and he wound 2 loose wires around its metal end. Now, he said, blow out the candles. Lena blew them out. The room went dark. Dune began turning the crank of his machine. At first, nothing happened except that the magnet turned around. Dune cranked faster and faster, and a glimmer appeared in the light bulb. First a glimmer, and then a glow, and then the bulb shone with a faint but steady white light. Lena shrieked. Poppy shrieked too, because Lena had, and both the doctor and Mrs. Murdo gasped and broke into applause. Kenny beamed, glancing between the light bulb and Dune's face. Torrin was being too careful to make a noise, but his eyes grew wide and his mouth dropped open. For almost 3 minutes, until his hand got tired, Dune turned the crank of his machine around and around. The doctor wagged her head in wonder. Mrs. Murdo turned her face away to hide her tears, and Torrin held on tight to the light bulb, even though it was getting very warm. Lena gazed at the light shining on everyone's faces. Full to the brim with hope and love and joy, she watched the little light bulb shining like a promise in the night. A promise in the night. The people of Sparks. Thank you, Miss Clark, for introducing us to this fabulous series. I will start the second book tomorrow, which is actually the third book tomorrow, which is a prequel to the first one. Okay, see ya.